So we're going to talk about how to engage and motivate product teams. And as Brendan said, my career has been on the cusp of product management and engineering. I've done both. I began as, I knew I was a nerd when I was in the 4th grade and built a 1 transistor radio kit instead of playing with friends. Actually, I didn't know it then, but I look back on it now and know that I definitely was a nerd. On the other hand, when I started in Double E in college in electrical engineering and veered off into graphic design, journalism, and magazine entrepreneurship before coming back to being a programmer. So I've got an interesting, as my mother uses the word interesting, I've got an interesting career. So I've written one of the very few books on managing software developers. I'll ask the rhetorical question of why is it that there are so many books on managing software development projects and so few on managing the people who deliver those projects? There are literally fewer than a dozen books in this category. And there are fewer than 7 when ours came out the first time. This is the 2nd edition, which came out in December after 4 printings and translation into 4 languages. I'm also the co-author of the study of product team performance, which is led by Greg Geraci of Actuation Consulting. We look at people in product teams all over the world and ask them to tell us how performant is your team? Is it high performance or low performance or something in between? And then we ask about practices and we look for correlations. We do the data science and look for correlations between practices and high performance teams. And I will share at least one of those as we go along because we released the latest, the 6th study in the series on May 1st. So these are a bunch of the companies that I've been with. I started as a programmer and interestingly enough, I took my first management job was an offer to come manage a product management group for development tools at Apple Computer. I spent a 1.5 years in product management, went back into development. I went back into development, they made me a manager. And then I went back into development and they made me a manager, and then I started managing developers and embracing managing developers, and that's what I've done at most of these companies. The focus of, I've discovered that since I left Apple, and I got to manage the golden tools, the UX and UI of the Macintosh Finder team. Since I left Apple, almost every single company that I've been with, they've been small companies, they've been huge companies like Schwab and Fujitsu and Stanford. I've been untangling knots in software development and making software development hum. 8 years ago, I started consulting, and I started a consulting practice focused on transforming chaos to clarity, and a combination of advising business and product team leaders and taking on interim VP of engineering roles, and coaching some engineering leaders. And I ran into Agile. So the other piece of my background is I ran into Agile for the first time 21 years ago when I brought Kent Beck, who had created extreme programming, down to Schwab to do some workshops for us in extreme programming. For the last 11 years, I've been training teams and executives in making their software development more effectively agile. And now I want to find out about you. And Tom, you've got a Zoom poll for us. I want to find out what your backgrounds are. So how many of you in your careers have been these things, and you can choose multiple choices if you've been something more than just a product manager in tech? So I don't get to see the results pour in. Tom, how are we doing? And you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm juggling multiple windows here. So we have currently 24 responses. About 2/3 of the folks have voted so far. So we'll give it another 20 seconds here to click through.
Perfect.
Shy. 10 seconds. 69% still coming in. No vote by mail here. 3, 2, 1. All right, end of the poll. And can you see the results?
Oh, yes, as I suspected, half of you were developers at some point in your careers. 20% of you were testers. Almost half of you were project managers at some point in your careers. 38% came from marketing and 23% from operations. Only 12% from sales and 4% from finance. And about a third of you have only been product managers in your careers. So congratulations. That's an interesting one. All right, so I'm going to come back to my slides and share a little bit of my context with you in this talk. So one, software development is a team sport. That does not mean that I'm not talking about teams that are a group of individuals that all report to the same stand-up and report about their individual work. I'm talking about actual teams and teamwork. This has been a mantra of mine since sometime before we wrote the book. I find it in the, I went looking for it and found it in the first edition. It has become a mantra of mine that we have to find ways to help our teams to be actual teams and not groups of individuals who happen to report to the same manager. Secondly, Agile is a mindset. And so 11 years ago, when I started training teams in Agile, I was transforming waterfall teams to Agile. In the last few years, I've been transforming Agile teams to Agile. There is an awful lot of Agile theater out there. There's a lot of Agile in name only. There's a lot of Agile practices going on without a lot of Agile going on. And Agile is fundamentally a mindset that is different and is greater than and is really about my third one, which is delighting customers. So contrary to the Agile Manifesto, which says satisfy customers, I think all of our jobs are about delighting customers. So that's my context. One more piece of background, which is we built our book. This is my fifth book. We built this book around 300 rules of thumb and nuggets of wisdom that my co-author and I had been sharing with each other over breakfast tables on weekends for a decade. And one of the, so I'm just going to share one of, actually I'm going to share two of those with you. One of them was about the first one that Mickey, my co-author, and I both collected, Brooks' Law. Adding manpower to a late software project makes it later. So can we do a chat storm and type in the date that Frederick Brooks wrote Brooks' Law, but don't press return. So put it into the chat and so type it in there and ready, set, hit return. Ooh, wildly varying set of numbers. So it was about 1975, and it was his book, Mythical Man Month. Now, one of the awesome things about rules of thumb is that we can say to our executives, hey, I didn't make this stuff up. Fred Brooks said this 45 years ago, and it's still true today. By the way, the Mythical Man Month is a great read. I highly recommend it to all of you. So let me share with you one more, which is about delighting customers. This is from Joe Kleinschmidt, who is a San Francisco CTO and now a CEO, and who said, in the beginning, everyone will talk about scope and budget and schedule, but in the end, that's not really what we care about. What we care about is this: people will love our software or they won't. That's the criterion to which we need to manage. And if you think about it, that's what keeps us in business, people loving our software. So 16 ways to engage and motivate product teams. Actually, I'm going to give you 17. I'm going to cheat. So the first one, though, this is a chart from our book. It's based on the work from Frederick Hertzberg. Frederick Hertzberg, for any of you who don't know, Frederick Hertzberg was the pioneer in the 1950s who recognized that it's not just, motivation is not just about motivation, it's also about demotivation. there are some fundamental factors that will demotivate people that you've got to make sure are taken care of before you get any shot at motivating them. Those are the red bars. But I want to point to the blue bars, which are the motivators, and the leftmost one, which is the highest one, which is, so this is not Hertzberg's chart, by the way. This is slightly tweaked by Mickey and me to be specific to programmers. The number one motivator for more programmers than not is making a difference in the world. It is making an impact. It is engineers got into engineering to make a difference. And that means that you, all of you who are product managers, all of us who are leaders need to share the big picture. We need to share what it is. We need to share the visibility into the business. We need to share an understanding of what real users do with our products, what they love about them, what they hate about them, what gets in their way, and those places where they truly appreciate the love that programmers put into their code and put into the product. And connect the dots between the big picture and the individual work that every programmer is working on, that every developer is working on, that every engineer is working on. Because of that connection between that daily work and that big picture and that impact is huge for motivation. Secondly, is being partners. And I love this picture. I think these two girls are actually pair programming, but it could be a product manager and a developer. It could be a product owner and a tech lead. It could be all of us. And here's a picture of a typical Scrum team. And we've got the team, and inside the team, we've got two specific roles. One's a Scrum Master and one's a product owner. And the product owner, we count on the product owner to not only partner with the team, but to also partner with the business in understanding budgets and all the ROI and all those kinds of things, and also partnering with stakeholders and customers. Those people who are truly understanding what it is that if we build it will delight them, and bringing that into the fold, so partnering in every direction. Product managers and product owners are at the hub. Then prioritization. So this is number 3, but I'm so tempted to make this number 1. As human, it is one of the hard things as human beings is to prioritize, is to order by value. And we talk about ordering by value. We're actually ordering by real value, by the ability to deliver value. But you need to be we leaders need to be the source of clarity for our teams. And the source of clarity, it comes through in the power of backlogs. One of the things that I truly love about Agile is whether you're picking Scrum or you're picking XP or you're picking Kanban, there's a backlog, and that backlog is ordered by the real value that you can deliver. The developer knows that they can walk up to the backlog and pull the top story off the top of the backlog, and they have the ability to deliver the most value that they can deliver to the customer. That's the power of a backlog, and that backlog's power is in your hands. Developers want to know that they're working on the stuff that customers value most. They want to know that when they walk up to that backlog and they pull the top story, that's the thing that's going to deliver the most value. That's the thing that's going to have the most impact. That's the thing that's going to make the most difference. There are no such things as 2 top priorities, and that's real, and that's really hard. And it means that that you product owners need to relentlessly reiterate the larger picture, the very few absolute must-haves while deprioritizing the rest, really focusing on the stuff that makes a difference. And here's one of my favorite rules of thumb around prioritization, which comes from Sheila Brady, who was a project management guru at Apple while I was there, who said, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And I happened to be at Apple at a time when everything was a priority. And the challenge was, so I was there between jobs. Steve had left, he hadn't come back. And the parade through John Scully's office, he said yes to everything. And the result was there were no priorities. So analytical, so how do we get prioritization? So there's two ways, and there's two books, and I'm going to share two books with you that I believe need to be on your shelf. This is one, Software by Numbers. Software by Numbers warms my analytical heart. I'll show you a couple of pages out of it. So here's looking at payback on developing features, and looking at not only at ROI, but net present value, the present value of future money. And it gets into all that stuff and how to figure it out and how to calculate it and all that kind of thing. And it truly will give you those of you who haven't read it, will give you an inside look at how it works, how the numbers work. And that said, my good friend Rich Marinoff scoffs and says, Ron, we can't put dollars against individual features. That's nuts. That's as crazy as asking our developers to tell us how many days it will take to develop any particular story. And to that, here's the second book, Steve Bachman's Practical Estimation. So Steve developed a technique 17 years ago for relative sizing, relative estimating, that can be used whether we're looking at how long is it going to take to develop a story or how much value does this story have. It can be used in both ways. So when it's used for valuing, it looks like this. We're putting Fibonacci. We're first ordering our stories by value. So the stories with the least amount of value here are at the bottom, the ones at the most are at the top, and we put Fibonacci numbers against them. And we don't have a lot of stories here. Notice that we've skipped some Fibonacci numbers. Here's a team that's taken 50 stories and put them on a board, and they've used a virtual board. So this is Miro, which used to be known as real-time board. And notice the one bottom row, 1s and 2s, and then 3s, and they go up into the 34s, 55s, and 89s up there up there at the top. This is similar to what we do on the development side, and having the entire development team order all of our stories. This is 120 stories and epics that the development team in 3 hours has ordered by how much time it's going to take. Not number of hours, not number of days, but is it smaller or larger than the other ones? And the very shortest amount of time, the upper left-hand story, the upper left-hand card, is the smallest story on the table. It snakes through to the very largest epic, the epic that will take the longest amount of time to develop, which is in the lower right-hand corner. By doing that, so here's a standard Scrum workflow. In the upper left-hand corner, I've just chosen Jeff Patton's story mapping technique to illustrate that we need stories. Once we've got stories, we can value them. We can have product managers value them. We can have developers and testers size them, and value divided by size is ROI, or bang for the buck. Now we've got an initial cut at how do we order them in a backlog. And once we've got and once we've added judgment to our rough ordering by ROI, then we can start sprint planning. So next way of motivating and engaging your development team, getting out in front and staying out in front of them. So one, having, when they walk in to do their first sprint planning, all of the stories for the project up front in the backlog, on the wall if you're co-located, on the virtual wall if you're not, in Jira or wherever it is you're working. Not the detail, just the epics and stories, just the names. I would be happy with just feature names. So we've got here, Tom, we've got our second poll coming up. And this is a poll that we used. This is a poll that we used in the study of product team performance that we just released on May 1st. And here's our poll. How complete is your backlog? So this, you get one and only one choice this time. This is not multiple choices, radio buttons. Our backlog includes all the stories and epics we anticipate for a 3 to 6 month project. 2, we have at least a quarter's worth of stories and epics. 2, we have only an interaction or 2. And we only have a sprint or 2 of stories in our backlog at any one time. My bad. 2, our product managers struggle to have a single sprint's worth of stories by the time planning rolls around. So pick one of those, vote. Tom, how are we doing?
So we've got just coming up on almost half of you have voted. I'm going to give it a little bit longer here up until a minute has passed. So if you you should be seeing the poll on your screen. If not, check your windows. There should be a window open somewhere in your system with the poll up front and center. So
on one of your
screens. Single click.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's. We're going to call this in about 10 seconds here. Feel like this is the auction. You know, do I hear 10? Do I hear 20? All right, just coming up, and we will close the poll here and share the results.
All right, so most of us do not have an entire backlog for a project, for a 3 to 6 month long project. While half at least have a quarter's worth, which is good, and all too many are struggling to keep up. So the staying out in parts. So the interesting thing that we found out in this year's study of product team performance is that the highest performance teams all have and sized and valued the entire backlog of their project. That really makes a difference, and it makes it. And if you think about it, it makes a difference because the team knows how much. They've got a sense of all of the stories, and it's not like we're going to deliver all those stories. It's not like because we deliver as much scope as we can deliver, but it gives us a sense. It's like having a product roadmap. Agile is not an excuse for not having a product roadmap, and Agile is not an excuse for not having a whole backlog. I think of a backlog as what we used to get in the waterfall days were hundreds of pages of requirements. And if we were able to pull the 3rd or 4th subheads out of that book of requirements, what we would have is basically feature names. And if we've got all the feature names on cards or virtual cards, and we can shift them back and forth between Jira and Miro or Mural, either one, to do this, then we can size them and we can value them. Off in a virtual whiteboard kind of setting, and it's just a really useful technique. It's a technique that I pasted in chat that will be demonstrated tomorrow night. So for all of the stories for a project up front correlates with the highest performance teams. Secondly, having 2.5 sprints worth. This is my rule of thumb as a Scrum trainer. As a coach, it's my rule of thumb having 2.5 sprints worth of stories that are always ready. So when the team walks in to do sprint planning, there is 2.5 sprints worth of stories. They are not epics, they are stories. They've been broken down into so that they can be completed in a single sprint, and ideally in half a sprint. They have acceptance tests. They have all the detail necessary for the team to walk into planning and being able to fully vet those stories and identify what the best sprint plan is and have that sprint planning meeting. Having all that stuff, being out in front of that is huge for your teams. So then there's what should we build? And I'm going to call out that it's really not just what should we build, but it's also who and why. So the format that Mike Cohn and others have given us for a story is as some kind of user, I want to do something in order to accomplish some goal. when we had those hundreds of pages of waterfall requirements, they were typically, they were just the, I want to do something. The do somethings were filled those hundreds of pages of requirements. We wrap who and why around it so that we develop understanding, so that our developers have more context. And Martin Fowler pointed out, building software off just a list of requirements misses out a lot of business context. Developers are told what to do without being told why it's important. The why often makes a big difference in doing the what properly. That why, and so I've seen people flip this story format and start with, in order to accomplish some goal, as some kind of user, I want to do something. So that why gets there up front. That why gives developers the opportunity to bring you back 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 options for delivering the why. And that can be huge in terms of the cost, and in terms of trading off various different costs of various different options for delivery. And never how. And the how, you want to describe problems and not specify technical fixes. So I've seen product managers go off to conferences and identify, boy, that's a cool thing. We need that thing in our product. Please insert that thing in our product, as opposed to what is the problem that our customer is trying to solve? What would delight our customer? What about that thing delights our customer? Because there may be 5 other ways of doing that, and giving developers, giving your team the opportunity to be creative in coming up with the cheapest, the best, and the most delightful ways of delivering that. When you do that, it can be really powerful. Then 6th of 16 is to block the, these are going to get, mostly going to get faster, is to block the noise. And this is incumbent upon those of us who are managers and those of us who are product managers and product owners, is to be a damper to the noise. And there's a couple of different things. One that's very specific to product owners, which is having the mantra when your startup CEO walks in the door and says, wow, I had this great idea, and stop the team, they need to work on it this second. The ability, the mantra to say, what a great idea, let me put that on my backlog. The ability then to, if you need to, walk the CEO up to that backlog and identify where in that backlog it goes, because it very seldom does it belong in today's sprint. The only, if I had my druthers, the only thing that would break a sprint would be downtime. When production goes down, everybody flies to fix it. That eclipses everything else we've got in our sprint plan. But outside of that, there's really not a lot that you should be breaking sprint plans. Remind your team to route outside interrupts to you. Developers get collared in the hallway by executives, by other product managers in other teams, by other teams. Remind them to route outside interrupts, to make those go through you, and really get good at the mantra. I'll put that on my backlog. And that brings us to really letting developers focus. So I often ask in Scrum training, where I've got developers and product managers and testers, and I'll ask the developers, so you're a good developer. On Friday evening, you're in the middle of code, but it's time to go home. And you're actually go home, and you're actually not going to work the weekend. And you're a good developer because you put a bookmark into your code. We call it various things in the code, but you're going to put basically what's a bookmark there, so that on Monday morning when you come in, you know where you left off. You're going to leave yourself a couple of notes. And those couple of notes, when you walk in on Monday morning, I ask developers, how long, you just sit down, so you get, email taken care of and Slack taken care of and that kind of thing, but now you're ready to code. You sit down in front and in front of your workstation, and you look at the bookmark and you look at where you left off, and you just write the next line of code, right? so far I haven't gotten a single developer to say right to that answer, to that question. And I said, and so then I asked them, well, how long does it take you to write that first line of code on Monday morning? And I'll get a range of answers, actually, and I'll get a range of answers depending on how complex the code is and how complex the situation is and how complex what it is they're working on is. Well, I get a range from somewhere between 15 minutes and half a day, actually, sometimes. But oftentimes it'll average out at a half an hour, and I'll ask the question, okay, so it takes you 30 minutes to write the first line of code. What happens if on Monday you're interrupted every 29 minutes? How many lines of code do you write? And their eyes kind of turn on, and it's like, you know, this big zero comes up. We don't get any lines of code written. Now there's actually another answer to that, which is, yeah, well, I see the interruption coming. It could be another developer, it could be the product manager, it could be the product owner, it could be a tester, it could be an executive, it could be my manager. I see that interrupt coming. It's 29 minutes. I think I've got enough. I'll write that line of code. Now, I've never met a developer who said, I came to our company to write bugs. Anybody ever met that developer? I've never met a developer who said, I came to our company to write bugs. So how can we possibly have, no developers came to our company to write bugs. How can we have bugs? And one of the places bugs come from is, I needed 30 minutes of context and I only had 29 when I wrote that line of code. That's one of the places that bugs come from. So we really need to let developers focus. We really need to avoid interrupting them. And it's by the way, it's one of the challenges of remote work. One of the ones I have called out for decades, for me as a manager, is that I can't tell whether a remote developer is heads down in the zone, building up that 30 minutes of context to write the next line of code. I can't tell that, or whether they just got up to get coffee, which is in the office, the easy time. I sidle up to them and ask my question at that point. We have the notion, and some teams are better at this than others, of turning off Slack, and some developers will actually shut it down. But we also find ourselves as developers sliding into the zone without realizing it, beginning to think about the problem, and suddenly we're deep in the problem without ever having gone through the conscious, I should shut off Slack stage. And so it is one of the challenges. And so one of the solutions, I think, is to really focus on aligning meetings, so that when you've got your daily stand-up, any other meetings with developers are right after or right before that daily stand-up, so that it's not a day that's punctuated with interruptions, but there's a period of interruptions where we actually come together as a team. So avoiding interruptions, multitasking doesn't work. All the studies all show this. We could do an exercise in about 4 minutes that would I think I could convince any outliers who still think that multitasking is useful or has any validity whatsoever. But I'll go back to the 30 minutes of context to write the next line of code. Boy, switching gears means switching context. It's another half hour. So being available to your developers. One of the rules of thumb for those of us, one of the things that I learned transitioning from being a developer to being a manager was that that as you go up the ladder, and this is true when you go to manager to director to VP of engineering to CTO or VP of product to CEO, the thing that makes you successful at one level gets in your way at the next level. So as a developer, the thing that made me a truly great developer was the ability to shut out the world. the ability to climb into the microprocessor and listen to the gates open and close. And as a manager, on the other hand, I needed to not only invite interruptions, but I needed to proact. I needed to not only put a welcome mat out in front of my door, but really, literally, proactively invite my team to interrupt me, to invite my team to bring me their problems at any particular moment. So while we just said don't interrupt developers, those of us who are product managers, those of us who are managers, those of us who are product owners need to welcome interruptions, and we need to be available for those. And one of the reasons for that is, show of hands, how many of you have ever, and so most of you don't have your cameras on, but how many of you have ever had written a set of requirements that had no ambiguities in them? Pretty close to zero. I've had one set of requirements early in my programming career that had no ambiguities, and it was just an amazing experience. But it's really, really, really hard to do and really unlikely. And the result is developers see an ambiguity. They're sitting there, they're coding along, they're in the zone, and it's like shooting pigeons with a BB gun. You know, an ambiguity pops up and they're pigeon gets hit by a BB. Sorry, I was a kid on a farm in Iowa. We shot BB guns at pigeons and annoyed them. And that's how developers feel by seeing ambiguities. And they look up and they look around, and if there is a product manager available, if there's someone to disambiguate that story, they will ask the question. If they have to reach out, it makes it less likely that they'll ask the question, and more likely they'll say, well, he probably meant, or she probably meant, and just continue coding. In which case they're making up requirements, which we don't want them to do. We want the people whose job it is to have a Vulcan mind meld with customers, that's you, to define what those ambiguities mean. And so being available is just critical. Being available during planning, with bringing in clarity, with bringing in prioritization, with having detail for 2.5 sprints worth of stories at the top of the backlog, with acceptance tests, being available during development to disambiguate, and being available during stand-ups to resolve issues. Because issues come up during stand-ups that we need that short of product managers being there to resolve, will result in developers resolving them in a less positive way for our customers. Which brings us to attending stand-ups religiously. Attending stand-ups religiously because, and it's one of the places that I see teamwork not working. One of the places that I see a bunch of individuals showing up at a stand-up. In fact, I see stand-ups devolving into, well, let's just share, into status meetings, which devolve into, well, let's just share stuff on Slack. Stand-ups are not intended to be status meetings. They are intended to be replanning meetings. And one of the things that, if you get the team there in the stand-up and they're talking with each other, and it's not just the 3 questions of what did I accomplish yesterday and what am I going to accomplish by tomorrow and what's standing my way, but how are we doing on our sprint plan? That's the fundamental question of a stand-up. And you'll discover that Bob or Sue or Sally are way behind. They walked into what seemed to be a simple story and a simple task in the story, and suddenly they discovered a ton of technical debt. That means that's going to take them all sprint to work through this story, and they have 3 stories on their plate. And unless somebody fills in on those other 2 stories, and there may be somebody in the sprint who can do that, but unless we have the conversation, nobody's going to do that. And we're going to end at the end of the sprint with stories uncompleted because we didn't have conversations as teams. And other times those conversations of teams realize that everybody is hosed. Everybody has walked in and discovered more technical debt. All the developers, nobody can come and have each other's back. There's just no way to do this. And it's up to product managers, product owners to identify which thing we ought to work on in order to make sure that our customers are satisfied, whether those customers are external customers or whether they're executives or whether they're stakeholders. What do we need at the end of this 2-week or 1-week period, however long your sprints are? What do we need to have at the end of this sprint to show the progress that in terms of our executives and stakeholders keeps them out of our team rooms, keeps them from bothering us for another sprint because they believe in us, because they see the predictability. What's the thing that has to be predictable? Which things? Because otherwise we'll get to the end of the sprint and we will have randomly not finished something, and it could be the key thing that we need to satisfy those customers. Then have the data. Developers love data. I already called out software by numbers as one of the ways of dealing with data, but fundamentally having the data from customers, having that Vulcan mind meld with customers that essentially by your walking into the room brings the customer into the room. The ability to anecdotally describe the problem that Joan or Stanley or Bob, customer had with our software, or that they desire to have with our software. Engaging users and actually taking developers to see customers, actually bringing customers in, actually watching customers on video, struggling sometimes to use our software. The most disbelieving developers will try to explain their way around software that doesn't work as they watch it not work. I very early on at Apple joined CHI, the Computer Human Interface SIG of ACM, the programmers and designers professional organization. And I went off to the CHI conference one year, and CHI is made up of a few of us in programming and a whole bunch of people in design and a whole bunch of people in user testing and a bunch of people in human factors and a bunch of people in graphic design and a bunch of people in research. And here's a group of people who understand customers. We count on them to understand customers as much as you do, as much as product managers do. And they were handing out buttons at that conference that said, "We are not the user." It was a reminder that as close to customers as we can get, we still are not the user. And boy, if you guys aren't the users, developers sure aren't. And letting them in to what users actually think and feel and experience in our software is just huge. Open that connection. And remember that it's not just about satisfying, but it's about delighting users. So listen, and I've got a few different slides about listening because listening is so important. Listen to your developers. Your developers will see opportunities in the code. They will see possibilities for features that you've never thought of. They will see the ability to take this routine and that routine and create a couple of lines of code that will put them together and create a feature that could be amazing. Don't encourage them to do that. Encourage them to tell you about that. If they do that, we have to support it forever. That's not a good thing if it's not going to delight users. Your job is to understand whether it will delight users and to encourage that input, to listen for that input, and to also listen to them about technical risk, about technical debt, about paying down technical debt, about the need to refactor code, about the code getting crufty and the code getting brittle, which is pretty much the definition of technical debt, and the need for automation so that you can roll out features more quickly. Marty Kagan, so to the notion of technical debt, I want to throw in the rule of thumb for Marty Kagan, which is Marty said, if your developers aren't spending 20% of every single sprint paying down technical debt, you are probably marching toward technical bankruptcy. 20%. Secondly, so I want to note that Greg Cohen and I gave a shared webinar to AIPMM. It's almost a decade, maybe it is a decade ago actually, on engineering management and product management, sharing and ordering backlogs, and inserting and incorporating all of those stories together. And it's still worth going off and watching today. Greg is the author of Agile Excellence for Product Managers and Strategy Excellence for Product Managers and Lean Product Management. And then I'm going to call out another quote from Marty Kagan, which is, if you're just using your engineers to code, you're losing half their value. Really engage them in understanding what they understand. And then finally, think about what we need to create teamwork is to create a culture of communication at every level with everyone, developers with other developers, developers with product managers with the rest of the company, up, down, within, across. It's just a culture of communication is just really critical. I'm quoting Kimberly Weefling here, but actually she was quoting some Greek guy three centuries before Christ. Before the Common Era. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in this ratio. And my rule of thumb is that provided that we define communication in this way, that we spend 2/3 of our time listening, that in tech, we cannot over communicate. Now, I think it's possible that in sales, they can over communicate. I think it's possible that in marketing, they can over communicate, but I don't think in tech, we can over communicate. And when teams go virtual, as all of our teams have in the last 8 weeks, when teams go virtual, we need to communicate 10x. All of the water cooler conversations, all of the walking through the hallway conversations, they all went away. We have to figure out how to have virtual coffee hours and virtual coffee meetings and virtual water coolers and virtual social connection with each other. And many of you are doing this, and it's wonderful to see. Then be tech savvy. Don't get caught. I've heard the words, I could probably code this in 5 minutes myself, or that's probably 4 lines of code. Be tech savvy enough to know that there's technical debt in there that your developers are facing down, and for most part, 4 lines of code might be what it would take to do it if there weren't any other code to put it into, but they're trying to put it into your app, and most of your apps suck. The code in your app, not the app itself, sorry, but the code it's laced with technical debt. Theme your sprints. This is one of the things that can really help to inspire a sprint, is to have a theme around the stories that are going into that sprint, an outcome for users for that sprint, and really the theme is a user outcome. It's user delight in some form or another. Make the trade-offs between scope and schedule. We all know that we don't get scope and schedule. So really interesting query that I make of software development teams, those teams that have worked in waterfall. I will ask them, so how many of you got 100 pages or 400 pages or even 1,000 pages of requirements? And and still somewhere around half for most teams. And I'll ask, what percentage of those did you actually deliver? The average I hear, and I've got product managers in the room, I've got developers in the room, I've got testers in the room, and the average I hear, the range is between 15 and 45%. The percentage of the scope that we're actually delivering. On the other hand, occasionally I get a NASA engineer in the room and it's in the 90s. It turns out when we send people into outer space, we want to get them back. And that's the difference between scope and schedule. Are we sending people into outer space and we need to get them back? Are we writing tax software? And if we're not in the marketplace on December 31st, we are not going to be in the marketplace for our tax software. We're writing entertainment software and there is a date in September, or maybe it's in August, when if you're not in the pipeline, you're not in the marketplace. Scope and schedule. And honor velocity. I see all the time, and this is not just true of product managers, but also managers. I see managers and product managers and wanting to stuff sprints. You know, let's be optimistic. And my response to that is adding paper to a printer doesn't make it print faster. Adding paper to a printer does not make it print faster, and adding stories to a sprint does not make velocity higher. Velocity is how fast your team is moving. What makes velocity go higher is amazing teamwork. It's fomenting amazing teamwork. It's getting your team to act like a team. It's getting the team to support each other, to be self-organizing, to have each other's backs. That will drive velocity higher, but not stuffing sprints. So supporting Agile values like self-organizing teams, here's the Agile manifesto and the values, and it's Agile values. It's not yeah, we have a stand up every day, and oh, by the way, it doesn't last for 15 minutes, but it lasts for an hour, or oh, by the way, we do it in Slack, or oh, by the way, it's a status meeting. It's actually getting back to the values of Agile that inspires great teams. So here's some words. Build projects around motivated individuals, trust to get the job done, face-to-face conversations, self-organizing teams. The team reflects and tunes and adjusts. This has got the magic of psychological safety built into it. It's got the magic of teamwork built into it. It's got delighting customers built into it. It's got people working with each other collaboratively and communicating with each other built into it. It's that self-organizing team thing. When I started, so I'll note that we wrote a whole chapter on culture in our book that if you want to dig into culture, it's probably worth looking at. But when I started training teams in Agile, I frequently got asked the question, are there projects that are not suitable for Agile? So we're far enough along the Agile curve that I don't get asked this very often, but this really set me back the first time I got asked this. I was really struggling if there was some kind of software that was not suitable for Agile. And what I finally realized was that the question was asked wrong, and I knew the answer. If we just asked the question, are there cultures not suitable for Agile? The answer is yes. Micromanaged cultures. Micromanagement disrupts Agile. It prevents best teams. It prevents learning. It causes teams to become order takers. And where in Agile, we want everyone to step forward. We want everyone to be a leader of the team. We want that leadership to pass back and forth like an improv group or like a jazz musical group or like the Golden State Warriors. Micromanagement, on the other hand, causes everyone to step back. It causes developers to put their hands in their pockets and say, okay, so I did that. What do you want me to do next? And finally, and this is the 17th, appreciate your team. Give them gratitude. Thank them. This is true for managers as well as for product managers. I carried around a 3x5 card in my briefcase for years that said, thank your team, to remind myself to do this. because it's worth reminding yourself to do it 100 times more often than any of us tend to do it. And don't just say thank you. Don't just praise them, but tell them why. Tell them what stands out. Tell them what makes a difference. So do we want to take some questions, Tom?
Once I found the unmute key. Yeah, I think definitely there's been some really good questions rolling past in the chat window. So we can take some of these as they come. Let's see. There was a question about when you were posting the results of your high performance teams. I'm scrolling back because there was a lot of great dialogue in the chat window. Let's see. Somebody was wondering about the kind of your demotivators versus your motivators, and whether you saw differences in that, any shifts recently, and also any differences between geographic areas, for instance, or different cultures.
The culture question is definitely a real one, and it's not one I could call out in terms of motivators and demotivators, because I think that from a motivation standpoint, I don't care where you grew up in the world. I think probably you got into engineering because you wanted to make a difference. It's just a huge motivator. And if you looked at some of the other things on that chart, there's having fun, developer and most of you know that developers like to have fun. Toys and technology. Developers like to play with toys and technology. Those are motivators, I think, that are pretty universal. To look at demotivators, the foundational factors, the number one on the list there is respect for your supervisor. It's something that we, Mickey and I, as authors of our book, own and believe that managers own. And to some extent, it flows over to product managers of respect for product managers. I think it behooves all of us, and respect comes from giving respect in many cases, and it comes from some of the things that I talked about there, from bringing the data, for example, for having had the contact with customers, that you can actually bring customers into the room, and that kind of respect spans geographies, and there's also one like administrative policy. Administrative policy can be a huge demotivator. I've never met anybody who went to a company to work because they had great administrative policies, but boy, I've seen some who left because of them.
Yeah, definitely. We have a number of questions that are kind of trying to grab a hold of kind of projects as they're getting started. When you have a mature product and you already got a backlog and all of that is set up ahead of time, that's kind of a stable state from there. But what about planning and any rules of thumbs for when you're sort of in that kickoff phase and you're trying to get that version 1.0 product out?
Yeah, so I think there's real similarities. So there's real similarities, and whether we're developing the next chapter of our product, the next version of our product, or whether we're doing a brand new product, there's a software development process called chartering that I think is just really valuable, which is and it goes to that teamwork thing, bringing the entire team together, bringing the vision into the room, bringing what it is customers want into the room, having developers help to map out Jeff Patton's story mapping process is a really good one for mapping out stories and getting understanding across a development team of what the customer journey looks like in terms of our product, what the customer use of our product looks like, the journey through our product. In terms of developing stories, that two-pass relative sizing that I showed you that Steve Bachman teaches in the book that I called out is really useful for development teams. That those 120 cards on a table were 6 months worth of work for a team. That in 3 hours they got them in that order and numbered with Fibonacci numbers, and walked out of the room with what every product manager always wanted when they handed you 100 pages or 200 pages or 400 pages of requirements, which is understanding. Really high level understanding, but that's really all you want when you know that your development team's ultimately going to deliver 15 to 45% of what's in there. If you're willing to recognize that, if you're willing to be honest with yourselves, to have a high level understanding of the whole thing gives them the understanding of what kind of architecture they need and how not to paint themselves into a corner. At the same time, they're not developing all those things at the same time, and so they don't need all that detail. They don't need 100 pages. They don't need 200 pages. They need the high level understanding. And it's a really useful chartering exercise to have them doing two-pass relative sizing with the stuff. And it's a really useful one for product managers to do the two-pass relative valuing. And in fact, we can use that in large companies with multiple projects, and we can do two-pass relative valuing of projects so that we understand what to do. We can, on the development side, on the engineering side, we can take all of our engineering tasks and technical debt pay down, and we can do two-pass relative valuing of those kinds of things, where part of the valuing has to do with risk and cost of not doing it.
Very good. We had a number of comments about handling pivots, which seems to be a popular thing as folks are especially adjusting nowadays to different customer situations and whatnot. Any comments about, you've got 2.5 sprints and you've got this big backlog, and how are folks dealing with kind of these pivots and readjustments to quarterly and yearly goals?
Yeah, so it's one of the things I love about backlogs. It's one of the things I realized really early on about backlogs and about startups and about new products. The very first, let me think. I think it was the very first team that I trained in Agile, and I was in there as a consultant, not as a trainer at that point. But it was a team that had they were building a money product. It was to ship money from the United States to other countries. So people were working here in the United States, they'd send money back to home countries. And they had a really clear understanding up front of how that was going to work. Except that every time their sales folks went out or their business development folks went out, they discovered something new about it. So here's a team that's a year into what they estimated would take them 6 months to build, and they still had 6 months to build. And it was because they kept trying to build what was in their requirements. And so we shifted them to Agile and said, look, all you need to do is just build a week's worth of stuff. And then your product managers are going to come back and they may take the thing that's at the bottom of the backlog and put it at the top of the backlog. That may suddenly have become the thing that's going to deliver the most value. But if we continue building the thing that's got the most value, we will have a thing in 6 months we'll have a thing probably in 2 months that's an MVP that we can actually try out with our customers and find out whether in fact that has the credence we think it does, and get the feedback so that by the end of 6 months we've actually got the right thing.
Very good, very good. So I've just got a couple more here. Let's see. It just scrolled off my screen as I was reaching for it. So hang on 1 second here, I'll find it. So there was a few discussion points kind of around getting developers out to customers, and customers are too busy to chat directly with developers. And then in some cases, I've seen organizations that were reticent to get, oh, this particular developer may be a brilliant coder, but I'm not sending him out and talking to a critical sales customer that could go poorly. Wondering if you had advice on kind of starting up programs to drive some of that understanding and some of that customer visit that you mentioned.
Yeah, the one way the one way glass is a perfect answer to that. Put the developers on the other side of the one way glass, and we could do one way glass these days just by pointing the very camera I'm looking at the user who's trying to use our software, and there are tools that let us do that, just do and get our users talking out loud about what they're trying to accomplish and how they can't find it, even though it's right in front of them. Even though, as my wife would say, it's right next to the butter, Ron. It's literally right there in front of them, and they can't see it. And we have to do something about that. That's not their fault. That's ours.
Yeah. And then finally, do you have any advice? Some folks were.
So I'm gonna just before you ask that question, I'm gonna stop sharing this, and I'm gonna share a poll that we're going to build a word cloud from, and I'll bring that up.
Oh, I pasted that in the chat window.
Oh, great, thank you. And there we go. So can you see that? So you're going to open a new browser window to menti.com and use the code 21640 in order to enter up to 3 words that you will, as a result of being in this talk, want to focus on motivating your product teams. Okay, Tom, you're
okay. And while folks are working on that, the other question that was coming in, there were a few queries about communicating up. You mentioned the salesperson or this executive management's coming down saying, I just thought of this great idea and or sharing as the status is changing on different things. How do you typically see best practices for managing upwards and communicating status, as well as sort of managing that interaction going up into the executive side of things?
Yeah, so I think that's an hour all by itself, but and I'm sure that almost everyone who's listening to me recognizes that. But I would call out one thing, which is managerial courage. The first person has entered some words, and we're going to see a word cloud come up. Managerial courage to say, no, we're not going to interrupt the sprint, or to ask the question, and often asking it in a questioning kind of way of and bringing the executives into the cost of interrupting the team. The fact that it takes 30 minutes, or maybe it takes half a day for some of your developers to develop the context to write the next line of code, and what you're asking is to interrupt them. And if we interrupt them, it's not just 30 minutes, because they will have shifted to an entirely different application. Now they've got to come back to that. Is that really more important than the thing that the team is working on? So the team is locked and loaded. They are set to be productive. What you're asking me to do is to help the team to not be productive, to be unproductive, to be less productive than they can be. Is that really what we want to do? And to generate that conversation, because there are times when it's worth that. There are times when that is the right thing to do, but it needs to be recognized. The cost of it needs to be recognized.
Very good. So hopefully the rest of you are working on the adding to the word cloud as it's developing here. This is kind of interesting to see how things are popping up. Couple of quick notes. One is that this is our first virtual event, but we will definitely be having more as time goes on. A lot of you have asked whether we will have this presentation online, and my answer to that is stay tuned to svpma.org, and we will post this this event, as well as we have a YouTube channel. So if you are an avid watcher of YouTube, and I think that's been growing lately in the last month, feel free to look up SVPMA. We have a link to it from our website, but if you click on the subscribe button for that channel, it pops up in your subscriptions. And if you have a streaming device, I happen to use Roku all the time, and when there's nothing on TV, which is most of the time, I scroll down my YouTube subscription channels, and it also will notify you when there's new videos posted. So instead of saying, is it there yet? Is there, or trying to remember, 2 weeks from now to check to see. So once we get the video processed, that gets posted up to the website. I'm going to throw it back to Brendan and see if he had anything to add. And then we can throw it open to the group if anybody had anything to say on audio.
Tom, the only thing I had was if you want to post in that NPS survey link into the chat.
Oh, do you have that handy?
Let me see if I can grab it. Hold on.
Okay, I have one too many windows and I don't have my big screens with me right now. So we'll get that in there. In the meantime, if while Brendan's getting that clicked in, if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask Ron a question directly, you're welcome to do so. We've got a little bit of time, about 10 minutes here before we close the bridge up.
So Tom, this is Debashish. I have an announcement. We are, as Tom and Brendan have mentioned, that this is the first of our virtual meetings for SVPMA. And we have a confirmation of next month's meeting, which is called Leading with Experience, a Product Manager's Guide to Awesome User Experience. And the speaker will be Satyam Kantamneni, who is the Managing Partner and Chief Experience Officer at UX Reactor. For those of you who have been to a product camp last year, you may remember that UX Reactor was one of our sponsors, and also they work on user experience. So this talk is going to be about how user experience is a key business differentiator and how product teams can work effectively with design teams. So it should be a fascinating talk. So we encourage all of you to attend next month as well.
So all of you that were asking about getting user understanding driven into your dev team, this would be tailor-made for that sort.
Yep, that's right.
So we have a number of participants on. If anybody wants to unmute, and if you've got any additional questions for Ron.
It's Jim.
Hey, Jim.
Yeah, you might want to monitor the participants to look for raised hands. That's a flow control that works well in this context. Anyway, Ron, great stuff. Start to finish, agree with almost everything. I was a little taken aback when you said lining up stories for 2.5 sprints. Yeah, I agree with that. But for a 3 to 6 month project, and I was thinking in Scrum, we don't tend to think of in a project-centered mentality. It was more a mentality of there's a product and it's going to be iterated, as far as we're concerned, forever, and small increments. So were you looking more at a safe model or something that's trying to marry the project mentality with the more organic, bottom-up, agile mentality?
No, I was really more looking at roadmap. So the teams count on product managers to provide roadmap. And roadmap somewhere, we tend to think of it in a year, 2 years, 3 years, but there's a 6 month point. Where do we think we want to be in 6 months? describe that. What are the features? What are the, you know, you can call them stories and epics, or you can call them features. But what is that? What does it constitute? If we were where we wanted to be in 6 months, what would we have? And,
Okay, so
and I guarantee you, we will not be there. That's okay.
yeah,
But
so it's not
a
rigid
starting
schedule.
point.
It's more a vision then.
Yes.
Got it. Thanks.
This is Gotham. I had a quick kind of question / comment. One of the challenges we're facing is that, you know, kind of the products that we put out is funded on the kind of annual cycle. And the problem becomes that when you plan ahead for the entire year and you have, let's say, the backlog at the epic level defined in it, what ends up happening is that because of the plan and annual cycles, we're kind of really committing to delivering all of those things throughout the year. That I think is challenging because one, you know, it makes it very rigid, right? And two, it, or maybe it's the same as one, it doesn't really allow you to pivot. That's the point that it seems like a lot of people are making. And because the planning cycle and funding is associated with that 1 year cycle, it becomes, again, it becomes challenging because we have to continuously deliver against some promise that was made to get funding for the next year or for the next quarter. So how do you balance that, and how do you kind of address that, you know, 1 year cycle and asking for that 1 year plan when really you want to be changing as the business changes? So for example, right now, you know, after this whole COVID situation happened, if you continue to look at the world like you did, you know, 3 months ago, and are still kind of trying to stick to that same product roadmap that you drew up in January, I think it's, you know, it's myopic. So how do you kind of continuously evolve and change when you've already kind of a promise to work on that for a year?
Yeah. So, you know, what your challenge is a corporate-wide culture change, and honestly, right now, COVID-19 is your best shot at making that point, and I think you just made it, Gotham, which is the world. The world. I don't know about you, but the last 6 weeks, it seems like we've had a year's worth of change about every week. And and I don't think we know. I don't think any of us have any clue what the world's going to look like in 4 weeks from now, let alone what it looks like a year from now. And I think it behooves us to recognize that, to filter that, to have the communication around that, to have the collaboration around what does it mean to deliver the most value right now. I mean, it is the magic of Agile, is that we're literally working on a 1 week or 2 week. A very few of you might be working on 3 or 4 week sprints where we're delivering the most value we can deliver in a week or 2 weeks. And that's I'm not sure that we can do a lot more than that right now. Now, we want a roadmap, but 2 weeks from now, we may, and it's what I said about that startup, that you know, 2 weeks from now, we may discover that what we thought was the most value, in fact, is, but we may discover that what we thought was the most value has gone by the wayside. And you know, the bottoms dropped out of travel. The bottoms dropped out of some kinds of entertainment. The other kinds of entertainment are zooming, and we need to adjust in order to be successful as teams, as departments as divisions and as companies, or we will cease to exist. There's some quota. There's Albert Einstein who said something like, if we don't evolve, we'll go by the wayside.
Good point.
Thank you.
All right, we have time for maybe one more question, and then we'll wrap up for the evening and let folks head off to their various kitchens and get some food and some rest and think about all this. Anyone else? All right, so it looks like we're took care of the bulk of the initial questions. I'm sure people will, as they think of things, mull this over, and they may come up with the last minute question tomorrow morning as they wake up. Feel free. We will be posting this on the YouTube channel, as well as on the svpma.org website. Keep an eye on the website. We are making enhancements to that website. There are over 20 years of archives of product management advice. If you're struggling with anything in particular, you can find some real gems in there. We're in the process of building a new index. Brendan and I are collaborating on a bunch of other innovations that we'll be rolling out to the website over the next month or two. So it's worth keeping that in your pocket to keep an eye as we get more of these talks announced and more opportunities to network and collaborate with one another. So thanks everyone for coming. We hope to see you next month, and feel free to reach out. You're always welcome to email me or any of the board members with suggestions. We'd love to hear what you thought of the talk. Things that we could improve. If we've got enough people here, I'm sure there's a lot of great ideas. So suggestions for the website, for future events, for additional speakers, virtually anything. We're all here to support one another, and that's what this is all about. So thanks everyone, and wish you well and good luck in everything.
A special thank you to Tom for being my Vanna White.
I don't know if that's my best job title.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank
you,
you.
Ron.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.